Welcome everybody to our improvisation and innovation here at 10 p.m. out of a 24 hours live stream science map. Monica, it's really nice to have you here. What do you do in addition to being a very successful professional jazz musician who is touring around the globe? What else do you do?
You know, that's usually a good question for a jazz musician, because most people think, well, what do you really do? Because they don't seem it's economically possible to make a living as a jazz musician. But it is somewhat possible. But I also love to teach about things. I love to write about things and research. So I'm kind of a person who puts a lot of different parts together. And so I also teach at Indiana University in the arts management program, and I teach about what I do, which is going out in the music industry and trying to make a living. And B, I realized there's a lot that jazz musicians do in terms of training. You know, jazz is one of those last few bastions of music that are focused on the process and not on the product. You know, most of the time you'll go to the Ariana Grande concert and you want to hear the song just like on the recording. But but in jazz, the focus is on getting together and then see what happens, and inviting everybody that's there with you to come into that moment and see what you create. So the purpose is not to recreate anything that you did before, but finding a new perspective on it. And so I realized that there's a lot in terms of training and how you approach this moment that translates into any other situation. And so the other thing I teach about is arts entrepreneurship and programming, meaning how do you approach new projects and how do you train your brain to be willing to improvise and come up with those ideas. So that's kind of some of the things I do.
That you also teach, for instance, business students how to be more innovative, creative, more improvising. And I wonder in how far we all can learn for our personal lives, maybe even for marriages, but also for our professional lives. I'm in a lot of interdisciplinary teams, and you have to go way out of your way to make that all work, and you have to deeply trust each other and rely on other people's abilities and expertise in order to really do something magical and something innovative and creative and new. But I think we all could benefit from this. So how can we all be more creative, and why aren't we doing it? Do you know?
I do. Well, I don't know, but I looked at a lot of things. I actually recently did a TEDx talk about it, which can be found. And so what I did with this model, I looked at the jam session. You know, this is how jazz musicians learn. So we get together in a place, make sure, you know, instruments are covered. And the purpose is to try things out, to get new people involved, to learn. And so I started studying that initially with David Baker, and then I went with some of the entrepreneurship experts to look at it. And I found there's 7 factors that make that work. So when you get together, so I'm sure everybody has seen has seen those jam sessions, or maybe not, but when you get together, there's some things that make it work. Number one, you want to get the best people possible. Okay. You always want to make, so, you know, and you can transfer that easily. So a group is only as good as the weakest link. That's usually.
What if they're really good, but they can't deal with other people?
Well, that's some of the other factors, but first getting there. So for example, you know, the Pixar Studios group you had. So you had George Lucas, who's really good at fundraising because, you know, he did a little thing like Star Wars, and then and then you have Steve Jobs, who is really good at vision and coming up, you know, with a larger vision for a project. And then you have Lessiter, who was really good at computer design and programming. So, I mean, they're just an example of a team where everybody was just really the best of the best and put that together. Or you look at the Beatles, right? So the Beatles had this period of time early on where they were in Hamburg in the strip club. And they played, it was, I think they had to do 8 hours every day for 7 days a week for 18 months. So that's a lot of hours when you count that you play together. So the better you are, everybody is, experts is good. Then the second factor is this willingness to improvise. And that's probably the biggest factor. And, you know, Charles Limpet did this study at Peabody where he stuck jazz musicians in that MRI machine and they played some task where they played something learned, and then they had to improvise something like a blues. And then he looked at what's going on in the brain. And so the moment they started improvising, like all the activity went to this prefrontal cortex, you know, and it was like opposite brain image than the learned, meaning there's a way of putting the whole focus on this moment part. It's like the daydreaming part of the brain. And all the others, the little voices of, oh, maybe you shouldn't, and it could be wrong, you know, you just turn that off. It's just this willingness to just go for it. And you know, showing that you can, by purpose, redirect that activity proves that it's something that can be trained, you know, that when you practice it, you get better at it. So that's that part that you were asking about, and I'll have some ideas about it. And then the third factor is this democracy model. So you have a group that gets together and then you switch off, you know. So usually the way jazz works, it's kind of like a pizza. So you have a pizza dough, you decide on a song, that's your, that's your dough. And it's good if you play the same song, right? So, and then you play that together and then everybody steps forward and it's like putting a topping on that pizza because the band just keeps repeating that same song. You know, you can hear it, it's the basic accords and whatever the rest does, you could keep singing the melody on top and it fits. But whoever's improvising is the one putting new melodies on that old. And so, but the fun part about it is that you never know what pizza you get, right? It could be put some spicy toppings on, some cheesy stuff. You never know. And then at the end, or it's more like a calzone because at the end you play the melody again and then you wrap it up. But meaning when a person steps forward and improvises, then the rest of the band doesn't go to the bar or tries to do something to undermine them. Then they play the best they can to support, you know, because they know the whole is bigger than one person that they contribute. So it's this democracy aspect that you switch off, you give everybody equal time, and you support each other equally.
That sounds almost like a family, right? That should support each other, but it also sounds like a team at work, which in some cases, you know, we just had a huge demo day event, and so a team, 5 of us get to present, and each one of us can't do it alone. We are dependent on each other, and you can either work together and it looks amazing, or you don't, and that's not what we do. So I think it's very, very applicable to many other circumstances, not just the pizza making in jazz. The next number.
So all applicable to any time you get in a group setting and with the purpose of coming up with ideas. And that's why we developed this model. It's like tools, you know, to check in place. So if you have a group and it's not working, you can say, okay, do we have the best people? Are people willing to improvise and have ideas? Are we providing that? So it's like a checklist. Are we providing enough space for everybody? Is that democracy? Or 4, it's this mentoring system that's in place, meaning usually the ones that have more experience automatically help out the ones with a little less experience. So it's this learning on the spot, and jam sessions is usually those who are the more elders and have played longer. If they see a younger one and they're struggling, you know, they'll show him what point to the right thing. So it's this mentoring system, which you also see in companies, you know, when youngsters come in and they shadow and they get, you know, placed. So 4, and then 5 is, we call it leaders and sidemen, meaning usually when you go into this group, you have a specific role. So usually there's one person who gets the gig, you know, organizes everything, pays the people, and does all that. And then if maybe that's the piano player. So the bass player, then the role of the bass player is to play the best bass they can. They don't also need to go and pay the people and get the gig, you know. We don't need that in that role. Or if you go back to Pixar, right? I mean, George Lucas has got to get the money. He's not supposed to do the computer design because he doesn't know anything about it. So the important thing is to realize what is my role, and how do I best fulfill it, not trying to, you know, do everywhere. So that's that leader and sideman, finding your role in that group and what's your purpose. So that was 5. And then 6, we call it community support, meaning you're not working in a vacuum. Usually that group is part of a larger structure. So in music, that would be, okay, you have the stage, so you can think about it in concentric circles, right? What's around it? You have the stage and then the musicians, and then there's the audience around it. So however they react is going to shape it. If only one person shows up and doesn't care, it's different than if you have a packed room and they go, woo, you know. And then it's the whole support structure of the space. You know, is there a sound person that cares or not? What about the bartenders? What about the place who's hosting? How often are they hosting? How are they treating everybody? And then you look at the city, maybe, is there more than that? Or is this the only one? Is this New York where you have like 50 million jazz club, or is it Bedford, Indiana, where you probably don't have one? And then of course, and that's why, you know, for example, Silicon Valley, where you have a place where everything is concentrated and you have all the resources, things work very different than if you do the same thing in who knows where. So this whole community support, what kind of resources do you have available, and how are you placed in your environment? And then the 7th factor is this continuous evaluation system that's in place, meaning, yes, of course, you know, you're improvising and moving forward, but it doesn't mean you can shape the process while you do it. You know, it's not just freely. So my sister, who knows nothing about jazz, right? She would she would always ask me, do you guys just make it up? I'm going, well, there's more to that. I mean, there's some rules and there's some ways to structure that. If I just make it up, you know, I could do that, but people don't like that. And that's, I mean, there's moments where you just have to do that too, but there's ways to shape it in the way you need it. So this whole evaluation, there's cues, right? You should look at each other. If something's sounding really good, you'll hear the hollers from the audience. You go, whoa, whoa, and it builds it up. If it goes too long, you'll see people looking at each other, maybe somebody stepping in. You know, if somebody doesn't know what to do, there's this story of Charlie Parker, who as a young kid, before he was Charlie Parker and the famous jazz musician, didn't really know much and went to a jam session and he knew one tune, but he had no clue what to do on stage. He just kept playing and playing because he was completely lost. And so finally the drummer has it, and he screwed off his cymbal and just threw it like a frisbee, and it landed next to him on stage with this big crash. And, you know, then Charlie knew, okay, I didn't do that right. And he went home to practice a lot and got really but meaning, you know, some ways of cues or shaping the process. So those are those 7 factors. And then, you know, what I talked about, especially in the TED Talk, is yes, we can transfer those 7 factors. And actually this whole effectuation theory, you know, Saraswati, one of those entrepreneurship researchers, came up with that, is exactly parallel, you know, using the resources you have and growing what you need to grow with it, instead of, you know, a management task where you make a plan and then put it all in place, but just growing it step by step. So it's, and her parallels are really interesting. But the problem is that this improvisation is one crucial element in it. And, you know, there's other studies that have looked at creativity capacity. And George Land was, and there's this NASA study. So it's a creativity test, and it's a longitudinal study. They gave it to the 4 and 5-year-olds. They all scored the genius level. The 12-year-olds, 30% scored the genius level. You get to the teenagers, you're down to 12%. And then us adults, you're down to 2%. So something happens from the 4-year-olds to adults. And one thing that happens is education, where we're taught that to give right and wrong answers. So, you know, a lot in creativity is based on this divergent and convergent thinking, but it has to go like one after another. First, you have to spit out all your ideas, and then you have to put them in buckets and organize it. But what we're taught in school is that when we have an idea, to wait, okay, is this right or wrong, or should I say it or not? And then little by little, you know, you're not allowed to do that anymore, just to spit ideas, wild ideas. And so what we need to do, all of us, is get away from being adding to those 2% and starting to train our brains again, and just taking risks. And it's just like working out, right? So you know, I run every morning, and usually people have a routine, but I do that. And if I don't run for a week, you know, I'll notice it. If I don't run for a month, I notice it even more. And so if I don't improvise for a week, you know, I'll get a little less, and the muscle gets weak, and the muscle gets weak. So just little things to do, you know. It could be look at your fridge, and so, I'm going to cook something today, just with stuff in my fridge. Or I'll just walk home today and take a different route and see what's going on out there. Or, you know, just something by purpose, doing something that you hadn't planned in a new way. Journaling is a great way just to take a moment every day and put in ideas, themes, something. So just trying to find that moment every day too.
And I think I hope many are listening, and hope you're all trying this out tomorrow. Tomorrow is a very good day to try this out. Even today, yeah, for those especially which are around the globe, because it's getting a little later. But it would be also really neat to see if there are slight differences potentially if you go to different types of arts, if you go to different types of science or engineering. I could imagine that sometimes it's really, really good to brainstorm, and in other cases it's good to take something that you believe might work and to start implementing it, and that's typically a slightly different process, and then it might not work. So in this case you can innovate again, and you might implement a second thing, and that might totally work much better than your first idea. So I think this iterative prototyping is very useful for for engineering, which we now have at Indiana University. In other cases, it just might be that you need to have another intermediate step to just get to the innovation and improvisation part. Because if you put the best experts inside of a room, it's not totally clear that they would start improvising. I think they have to have a challenge or a goal that unites them all and brings them all together. And I think they are in that room together. Or you might give someone right there because you think this is the team which can solve that problem. And I think then it's really, really neat to have somebody like you and tell them, yeah, this is what you need to do. You have to trust each other. And then you have to start masterminding together. These are some of the tricks and tips that I can give you. Do a lot of improvisation in your own life. So I wonder if I think you had something where the audience could actually participate, and let's see if this is.
Well, obviously I'm a jazz musician, so I but and train that. But there's one thing that I love to do more and more. It's a really fun challenge, and it's taking numbers and see what you can make out of it. Okay. So we're putting the challenge out there. If somebody wants to send over, usually like 5 to 7, 8 numbers works. So it could be the birthday, or it could be a birthday. I'm not going to send your social security. That's not a good idea. Or a friend's birthday. Yeah. Okay. So use the Q&A function and throw that over, and you might just be able to hear me make something up on whatever. Do we have one?
Yes, pi, the number pi.
Oh, how far? 314,159. Let's go that far. 314,159. I think that's a good sequence. Switch. So 3. So if we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, 9. I think that's good, right? 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, 9. Oh, that actually works really well. 3. So let me see what we can come up with. 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, 9. That's I actually like the number like pi. That's a great. Yeah, questions or more birthdays. Okay.
All the way through pi.
Well, and then you have to remember.
And you can never be done.
But one too is also like when you set numbers into music, it's like the Schoolhouse Rock, right? Or specific. It's really a great memory aid. I definitely know like the first 4 numbers of pi now forever because 14159. It's an additional way to make a deeper memory. Or nobody will ever forget the ABC song or the ABCs because you just think about the ABC song and you got it. Open chin 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 chin. So, Kati, you're inspired to improvise?
Ooh.
Well, you do it all the time.
It does work differently, so in the arts and sciences and the engineering sciences. I think you would always. All right, wonderful. All right, you're on there. Thank you, Andreas, for doing this. So I think in the sciences and in engineering, you would typically start with some building blocks, and you might combine them in new ways. You might, for instance, have a data set and an algorithm which has never played together. And now you try to make them work. And of course, typically that data format doesn't go into that algorithm. So you have to have a converter so that the algorithm finally can read it. In other cases, you might also like to just see one problem from many different vantage points. And I think that's also what you do with the melody you just composed in front of our eyes. Very impressive. You might also have opportunities to design visualizations for people which never had the opportunity to see these kind of visualizations before. And then again, you now have to, just like Andrei Skupin pointed out, you have to somehow communicate how these visualizations might work in a way so that it's easy. So you have a very low floor and a high ceiling. So in order to then really have some benefit from your innovation, you have to help them get from where they are to where they could be, and enjoying that new way of thinking and interacting with data. And I think that's non-trivial to achieve. And often you have to really get a team together that's open enough and courageous enough to really go so far out of their own comfort zone to talk to each other and to ultimately work together in a way that's productive. And in some cases, it's just not productive. It's just like a war zone. And then maybe you have to step back and get a different team, or you try a different approach. There are many, many different ways to let people work together. And then I see myself more and more kind of designing incentive structures. Like where do we want to go together? What problem, what challenge do we want to solve together? And then how do you get people to go there? And Kevin Boyack today, he had these great metaphors. And another metaphor, which he didn't talk about, is the metaphor of what funders do. They basically put a little bit of money somewhere, and then people come because it's like cheese, which you put somewhere, and then the mice come and they eat it up, and then the cats come and they like the mice. So there are certain causalities in life. And I think you can watch people and you can see what they would like to accomplish and what they would like to do and what they can do. And then you construct teams that really work and have fun together and are highly productive. And I guess you do the same, because I see you sit with different jazz musicians all the time. And I have the feeling that in some cases, you might even not have practice with them. If they're real experts, you can come into the room, you quickly agree on something, and then it's showtime, right? So that environment wouldn't really work in my environment.
Well, I mean, the reason why it works, it's kind of when you get together and you play a game, when you play a game of Monopoly, you usually have some ground rules, that everybody rolls the dice and you get a certain amount of money. And when you get over start, you get 4,000 and you buy. So if you get together and you have some ground rules, then you can engage in this game. You don't know the outcome of the game yet, and that's the fun part about it. But the reason why it works, so it's the same when you get together with those musicians that you never played with, you know, there's certain ground rules that everybody follows because they know the etiquette, and that's what makes it work. But everybody has to be ready. So for your teams, you know, what you're thinking of, so often it's the problem of putting this divergent and convergent thinking in two different spaces. You know, that's why we lose a lot of the creativity, because before we formulate an idea, you know, we'll evaluate it already. So any chance to provide opportunities to just get lots and lots of ideas first, and then go to the next step and read through, just like you explained. I usually, when we do it in class, you know, we start out with a problem, and then I make each team like come up with 100 solutions to it, which is a lot. Well, or just ideas on how to solve it, and they go, really, we have to do that? And then, and then but what you see, you know, if it's, I don't know, if they're trying to solve a better way to recycling. So first they will start, you know, having different buckets, having a different recycling center, or dividing it, having a different schedule. And then when you get to idea 50, you know, it just starts to go like further out of like, maybe we shouldn't even have containers, you know, maybe we'll go in the market and have all the veggies just open and everybody has bags, and you know, and then you go to idea 75 and then it gets way out of space. Maybe everybody should start growing their own garden, or yeah, you know, so whatever that is. But by idea 100, you look at the last ones, and you know, you come up with like really wild ideas, and then, you know, sometimes you think, well, they're pretty useless, you know, what are you going to do with them? But most of the time, to really find a new way forward is the out of the box ideas, so with the wild ones. So allowing that opportunity to go really far out first. Essential ingredients, and I'm sure you do that all the time when you work with your teams, you know, trying to just come up with the wildest and craziest.
I think the closest we might be doing is brainstorming sessions, where this is exactly what you do. You're not supposed to criticize anything. You're supposed to just generate ideas. And it's tomorrow that you would judge them, but today it's just generation of ideas. And I think it really neat things happen if people build on each other. And I think that's what you do in jazz, right? You give each other energy, you have new ideas, people build on it. And I think that's really where the team then comes in, if there are people really looking at different parts of the problem and combining their expertise. And I think that can be a lot of fun, and maybe we should just do more of those. Now I'm inspired, right? And Andreas can then tell, yep, that's when that started. It was right here. Yep. What we do is to have the information visualization students generate a lot of different hand sketches. And many people don't want to sketch. They want to just do something with the computer. And I'm like, no, piece of paper, sketch it. And then they also have to draw lines on paper. They don't like that necessarily, but it gives them a skill that is just useful to have, because oftentimes you always have a piece of paper and you have maybe a client in front of you and you have to then communicate some idea you just had, or capture an idea that you can keep. Okay. Okay, so something is happening. There might be questions from the audience. Feel free, feel free. And there might be another lucky one who gets a real birthday or another Greek symbol musified. We had all kinds of cool new terms created today during the panel with Ryan, but also earlier in the maps and macroscope panels at Todd led. So why not create more?
I think the audience can probably hear me. Can you hear me as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, perfect. All right. Hi there. Sorry, it's not yet slurred speech, but I made myself a big glass of Glühwein. Very fitting.
Nice.
And fitting, I
All
topped
speak
it with,
German.
and I topped it with some flambéed Austrian Inlander rum, 80%. So, but on the topic of improvisation, so I'm thinking of my work, and much of the work that's done here is improvisations on the theme of space. That's what I boil my work down to. If I can see a space, then I can make it visible. And if you can see a space and you can convey to me your spatial notions, I can make that visible. So an example is this social network of wild pigs. So this conservancy, Tejon Ranch Conservancy, they came to me with a problem, these wild pigs, and they're trying to control the population. And I have a way of controlling the wild pig population, but I can only eat so much. And so there's only so much Wildschweinbraten I can have. And so they have these wildlife cameras. They have these 48 cameras in a grid on this territory. It's the largest privately held land parcel in California. And they're trying to understand the population. So they came to me, the geographer, and they thought I would map these observations at these cameras in geographic space. But we were brainstorming, whiteboarding, and it turned out they were trying to understand the population. And that meant they were trying to understand the social interactions, the social groupings. So what I ended up building was, from their wildlife camera observations, a social network of the pigs. Now, it's not geographic. It was not the kind of space they had in mind, but space is what I improvised on. And I just had to gather out of them what they really needed and turn that into a spatial notion. And so I feel that's a common theme here, that you need, and I hear that from Monica, you need some kind of shared language, shared understanding. And by the way, that's what maps have always done. Like in urban planning, for example, why do we have maps in urban planning? It's so that we have a shared space. So that when people say uptown, midtown, lower garden district in New Orleans, I lived in New Orleans for many years, that they're actually talking about the same thing. And so to me, this is all an improvisation about something, and in our case, it is about space.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's mostly that willingness to engage in that process, right? So when they came to you, you could have easily just said, okay, you're giving me the camera, I'm mapping where the pigs are, right? Because
Right.
that's what they were asking. And you would have never gotten to that point of realizing, oh, it's the social pig network that we're actually
Right.
looking to. But you had to be willing to say, oh, yes, and okay, let's see. Yes, and let's see what else is there, and then get more input and everybody before you evaluate that first idea. And I think that's what I'm getting at, that often it's taught out of us because we're expected to say a right or wrong answer, or to say something clever. You don't want to just spit out ideas because you could look stupid. So to get back to this notion of no idea is stupid, it's all, just there, and then we'll go and figure out that it's actually a pig network.
Well,
I
to
think,
be sure,
Andre,
there
what you
are-
also did, can you hear?
there are stupid ideas. However, it takes a while to get there, to get to the understanding what is stupid and what is actually interesting.
But I think you went that extra step, Andre, that they asked you for something, and you said, well, is this really what is most useful on your end?
Right.
Or is there a different way to see that problem and to solve it ultimately using a very different vantage point, metaphor? Maybe you have to gather more data because now you're actually having a slightly different problem. And what I see happening in many of our projects is that somebody comes to us with a problem. And if we just solve that problem, they are not going to be done and they are not going to be totally having that solved. Instead, we have to step back and look at the problem more holistically and potentially have a very, very different approach to it than what they expected us to do. And then you have to communicate this in a way so that it's easy for them to understand, oh yeah, that's what I really wanted. It's this old problem that people wanted to just have faster horses. And then they got a car out of that. It's a very, very different solution they got for the problem they had.
The time you see that process best in crisis, when you have, you know, just things falling apart and people need to react quickly and find a solution. I mean, that's where it really kicks in, this willingness of, oh my God, now what are we going to do? And we can't do our usual solution. You know, crisis, we had to solve it when COVID kicked in. We had to all go in crisis mode and improvise how our living rooms now look like, and buy lights so we can live stream and improvise how we interact with our classes. I mean, that was, and those who were willing and had trained their brain, you know, at least to some degree, and to do that were quicker at finding those solutions than those who have these fixed mindsets and just go, well, I just can't. I'm just not able to.
Maybe it's also true that many people are very happy with what they have. They don't want so much change in their lives, but it can be invigorating to have that change. And so it's a side, it's good to have traditions and to feel very comfortable with the people you have surrounding you. But then at the same time, it's also kind of cool to invite a stranger to tea or something. And oftentimes, with masks, of course. And oftentimes that brings in new ideas. And right now, this is, I think it's totally possible, especially with Zoom. Now, are there any more numbers or any other questions? I can go to the other room and see if there are any other questions. All right. Yes, we had a plan. So let's. Oh, okay. All right.
Monica, I have a question.
Go for it.
You talk about teams and what it takes to be innovative as part of a team. And so based on your experiences, so what are the circumstances when whatever you may want to try, it just doesn't work, right? What are the factors? And if we know these factors, we can maybe try to avoid them or avoid certain types of people or whatever it is. The factors that make these efforts not work.
So it's kind of a toolbox, right? So you have a group and for some reason, you know, nobody's coming up with anything. So one idea to check on that is, let's go through the factors. So first you could say, okay, do we really have the best, or maybe is somebody in the team who just doesn't have the knowledge, and then say, okay, we have good people. Then next factor, you go, okay, are we willing to create ideas? Did we provide enough space, enough room to go into this ideation process? And you could try again, say, okay, let's just, you know, give an hour and get to idea 200. And then go to factor 3. Are we giving everybody same space, or is somebody just taking over and talking all the time and doesn't let anybody else? So let's take a moment and just make sure everybody is formulating for 5 minutes what they think, same space, same amount of time. See if there's something that we missed, you know, maybe somebody didn't get to speak up or that. And then you could check, okay, what about this mentoring? Do we have some that have a little more experience? Are they willing to give advice, or is that working? Or are maybe some youngsters saying, you know, I'm not taking anything from you. So that might be an issue. And then looking at the wider community, where are we functioning? You know, maybe we should be in Silicon Valley and not sit in Bedford, Indiana, because we just don't have the right resources to come up if we need, you know, a specialist here, or we just don't have the environment to foster what we're trying to achieve. And then put this continuous evaluation system, see if you can put checklists and, okay, so this is not going the right direction, so let's stop here for a minute and go back and see what went wrong, or give cues or shape this in different. So it's kind of a toolbox. I mean, it's you know, never a solution. I mean, you can never have a solution to creativity. Yeah, today we're creative and it's working, but you can at least figure out, okay, we have issues, you know, here or there, and maybe if we give more space to everybody or leave more space for ideas, maybe we can shape the process better.
Tricks are interesting, because if you take the normal ones, right, you could just incrementally innovate, and in many cases that's a good thing, because it's very stable and gets you very slowly and steadily to some new place, hopefully a better one. But sometimes you need a kind of radical solution and change, kind of a scientific revolution, because the old knowledge structures don't work anymore, or you now want hybrid cars or fully battery driven cars. So that's very different from having gasoline powered automobiles. And so you need these kind of very, very radical changes, which are hard to implement. And I wonder, you must have that in jazz as well, right? And sometimes maybe the audience, they might not be fast enough to pick up of how cool that is, right? And then you have this cool product and this cool team that can actually pull it off together. But the audience is not ready for it. So how do you deal with that in the music business?
So yeah, I mean, that's a very common situation. So figuring out how to relate to what the circumstances are where you're playing for. I mean, yes, jam sessions is great, and this is a place to experiment. But in terms of like performance practice, so for example, if you play for a wedding or for a private event, and you know you're supposed to play somebody's favorite music or so, you're not going to go out and try to be John Coltrane and play 20 minutes on my favorite things and because that's not the place and time. So, you know, this is where you look for the community and what the purpose is and of what you're creating. But maybe you're in the Chatterbox in Indianapolis and it's a dingy nightclub and people expect you to try new things and get experimental. And that's when you don't want to play the way you look tonight again this time, but that's when you want to play 20 minutes on my favorite things and 20 extra minutes on it and and get the feedback. So that might be what you were thinking of. So it depends also on you know what's the purpose and the structure and who is Go for it, please.
Dear Monica, do you have a huge map in your mind when you play piano? I think so, even though I do not know how to play the piano.
Do I have a map in my mind? I mean, one thing I think we have to realize about creativity is that our brains can only put together things that we experience somehow. So we cannot make anything up that we don't know. So I just have fed my brain with as much stuff as possible, you know, knowing about the chords, practicing how my fingers work. So, and listening to, okay, this is how this sound and this chord sounds, that I can, when I improvise, my brain can move ahead and kind of form an idea and an image. And I have a, you know, a style that I like of sound, and then I'll go for that. But it's a matter of I call it the bag of tricks of just accumulating as many options as possible that I can draw from, so that I can move forward. And I hear something, oh, that sounds good. I know when I go here, that sounds good and that sounds better. But I get to that point of that my brain just pulls that out because it knows what that is that I'm looking for.
Just to follow up to that.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm curious about the relation between habit and flexibility, because I might have thought that those were like opposed to each other, and yet I've gone to your house and I've seen you practicing your skills like everybody else. So how do you take habits which are sort of automatized and routinized and sort of like the robot on you, and yet do something flexible with them? How do you end up so you're not just doing things in a kind of robot-like way?
Summarize the question with Christiane.
So Rob is asking me, obviously there's all, you know, well, if you just practice things and then you're supposed to make something up, are you just actually not making things up in the moment, but just doing something that you practiced before? and I think that the thing to realize is what I just explained, that every time you make something up, it's a combination of things that are somewhere in your brain. So it's just realizing in that moment, let me pull, you know, all the things that I want to hear, I like to hear. So it's when you practice pulling out all the things that you appreciate that sound good, and getting them in your hands so that you don't have to think about it. I mean, if I would have to think about, okay, I hear going la la la, and I can't find it because I haven't practiced how to do my fingers going la la la, then it doesn't work. So I need, you know, a lot of skills and flexibility and hand to brain connections to pull that together. How to keep it fresh, you know, it's tricky, right? So you have various jazz musicians. You have an Oscar Peterson who, I mean, nearly sounded the same every time, you know, he would play a tune, because, I mean, it was dazzling what he did, but obviously he had a very specific repertoire of things to do, right? Or an Art Tatum, and then you get a Cecil Taylor and you don't know what to expect because it's crazy. So there's a spectrum, I guess, of novelty, and it's the same with ideas, obviously, right? You have a spectrum of novelty for your ideas. Sometimes it's a really incredible idea, and then of course you still need to make it a real innovation. You have to figure out how to make it sustainable and work it. And sometimes it might be just a little improvement on something, and that's okay too. It's still, you know, something moving forward. So I guess, you know, the answer would be it's always a spectrum. Sometimes it might be more novel, sometimes less, but it's okay. It's always putting it together in some different way.
And maybe that's all back to map making, which is the theme of the event, that also those which do a lot of data visualizations or maps or macroscopes, they practice all day long how to convert that data into something that people can act on. And if they did it well, the visualization goes away. People just see the data in a new way, and they start asking new questions, and they get to understand their world in a new way. And in order to get there, they have to be mastering these 500 plus different types of visualizations and probably 200 different types of data analysis algorithms and many different data formats and maybe 10 or 20 or 30 tools. So that's the kind of practicing that we do at home when you do your piano lessons. That's when we do the trying out new combinations of these data sets and algorithms and visualization metaphors. And some work and just beautiful and amazing. And others just totally don't work. And you thought they could work, but they just don't. And so you have to be able to let go of them, even though you just invented them. And I think it's interesting to really see these analogies between so different lines of expertise and human endeavor. I think you had a surprise and a treat for us at the very end. So, okay.
It sounds less like a map, but it seems you're navigating a kind of space, a landscape of all possible sounds, sometimes going to nearby, sometimes far away by connected places. Some of that landscape is shared with others, some are only yours.
That's a really nice comparison to see it that way. And you know, just like Kati just explained, in every field, that process is a little different, but the goal being of just taking all the dots that you can put in your brain and know about, that's the knowledge base again, and finding ways of connecting them in the ways that suits the goal that you're looking for.
We got a sound suggestion. Today's Date by Vern Felby.
Today's Date, I do that all the time, yes.
Nice to see you.
All right, today's date is December 12th, 12, 11. Ooh, that's going to be a lot of 1 and 2. 12, 11, 20, 21. Yep. 12, 11, 20, 21. So we'll just have a little back and forth here going. 12, 11.
Kati, are you going to come back to the stage?
He's got the ball.
You want to play until she comes back?
Yeah, let's do some skating. It's Christmas! you.